The snowstorm had swallowed the battlefield. Broken weapons lay buried beneath the ice, smoke still curled upward from melted craters, and silence ruled where moments ago screams and gunfire had thundered. Commander Rian stepped through the wreckage. With heavy boots, his rifle raised, eyes scanning left and right, his breath rising in thick white clouds, every sense alert. The war had ended just hours ago, but his instincts told him something was still breathing in this frozen ruin. Something waiting, something watching. He moved past shattered alien armor, strange blood staining the snow in colors that didn't belong to Earth. His squad was gone, extraction was delayed, and the cold was eating through his combat suit like invisible teeth. One signal on his scanner still blinked, weak but alive, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. He followed it to the edge of a collapsed wall where heat signatures flickered faintly beneath the rubble. He approached carefully, fingers on the trigger. But when he turned the last corner, his boots stopped. There she was, the last enemy standing. Or rather, kneeling, not with a weapon drawn or claws bared, but with her arms bound behind her back and her silver-skinned body trembling in the snow. The alien warrior he had faced on the coms just days before. The same voice that had called for his surrender, now begging without pride, her armor shattered, blood leaking from a wound on her side, her glowing blue eyes locked onto his, and she whispered with broken breath, "Please don't kill me, human. I'll keep you warm tonight. I promise, just don't leave me here." Rian didn't lower his weapon, not yet. Not even when she fell forward into the snow, her knees sinking, her shoulders trembling. He had seen alien tactics before. Traps hidden in mercy, lies disguised as weakness. But something in her voice cut deeper than any knife. Not fear, not manipulation, but something ancient and raw, something almost human. She didn't try to crawl away, didn't reach for a weapon. She just stayed there, shivering like a leaf on a frozen branch, and said again, softer this time, "I'll give you my warmth, human, if you let me live." Rian stepped closer. Boots crunching the snow, rifle still pointed at her chest. He stared at her face, looking for deceit, waiting for her to strike. But all he saw was frost clinging to her lashes, blood soaking her ribs, and breath that came slower each second. Her species wasn't built for this climate. They needed heat, constant internal balance. Without it they failed, shut down like machines without fuel. This wasn't a trick, not anymore. She really would die if he walked away, and maybe she knew he would. Maybe she'd accepted that. But he didn't walk away. Instead he knelt beside her, slow and careful, set the rifle in the snow. His hand reached toward her, and she flinched, then froze. Her wide eyes filled with disbelief as he gently touched her shoulder. Not to strike, but to check the wound, he whispered, more to himself than her. "You're not going to last long like this." And she answered with a weak smile, "Not." "Without warmth, no. But you could save me, if you wanted to. I swear I'll repay you. Not with weapons, not with war. Just warmth, shelter, whatever I can give. Even if it's just my body. I don't want to die here, not alone, not cold." Her words burned into his mind like fire and frost. The offer wasn't seductive. It was desperate and honest, too honest to ignore. Rian pulled a small thermal shield from his pack, pressed a button, and unfolded it over them, thin as a sheet. But radiating faint heat, it wouldn't save her entirely. But it was a start. She looked at it like it was a miracle, her head lowering as if she had just seen mercy for the first time, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Why human? Why help me after everything?" He didn't answer right away. He didn't know the answer himself. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the way her pride had fallen away and left something real behind. Maybe it was just that she had asked, begged, and no one had ever begged him like that before. Not as a soldier, not as a man. It did something to him. Shook something loose inside that the war had tried to kill. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but steady. Because you're still alive and you didn't have to be, and maybe neither did I. She leaned against him then, weak and exhausted. And for the first time since the battle began, Rian didn't feel cold, not because the temperature had changed, but because something deeper than heat was beginning to stir between them. Not trust, not yet, but a pause in the war, a breath between enemies, and maybe the start of something stranger than either of them expected, something that felt like survival, and something that might turn into more. He looked at her hands, still tied behind her back, and hesitated, then reached to untie the bonds. She didn't resist, didn't flinch. Just watched him with those glowing eyes full of something ancient and wounded. As the rope fell away and her arms dropped to her sides, she didn't attack, she didn't run. She just breathed out, long and slow, and whispered once more, "I meant what I said. I'll keep you warm. Not just tonight, not just for survival, but because I want to. Because you saw me, not as an enemy, but as something worth saving." The snow fell heavier outside the thermal shield. The wind howled through the ruins, but inside that fragile bubble of heat, a human and an alien sat side by side, neither knowing what would come next, only that they had stopped the killing for one night, and that maybe, just maybe, mercy was stronger than fire. The wind outside grew louder, like claws scraping the broken walls, but inside the weak thermal shield, the silence between them was louder still. Karila leaned gently against him, her silver skin still cold to the touch, but warmer than before. Her breath shallow but steady. Rian stared at the small fire unit flickering near them, its glow barely fighting back the deep blue shadows that crept along the edges of the ruins. He didn't trust her, not fully, not yet. But something in him had shifted the moment she fell to her knees and begged, something deeper than orders. Or war, something he couldn't explain. He checked her wound again. The bleeding had slowed, but her pulse was weak, her eyes half closed but watching him from beneath heavy lashes. Her voice, soft and hoarse, reached his ears. "I thought humans were heartless, cold like machines. You've proven me wrong twice now." Rian didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted the small blanket from his kit and covered her shoulders. The act made her flinch as if kindness hurt more than pain. She turned her head toward him and whispered, "Why do you hesitate? Do you still think I'll betray you?" Rian looked into her eyes. The glow had dimmed, but not the fire within. "Them. I don't know what to think," he said. "You're the first of your kind who hasn't tried to kill me." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "That was before I knew what warmth felt like. Before I knew what mercy meant." Outside, the snow thickened, and something in the wind shifted, not just cold now, but sharp, like the breath of something watching, hunting. Karila suddenly straightened, her body tense, her ears twitching. Her voice urgent. "Do you hear that?" Rian froze, listening. Then he heard it too. A crunch in the snow, slow and deliberate. Something large moving just beyond the ruins. Not a machine, not a patrol, something else. Karila's whisper turned to a hiss. "They've come, heat feeders, drawn to warmth. We're glowing beacons." In the cold, Rian grabbed his rifle, checked the charge, and moved closer to the edge of the shield, peering into the swirling snow. Shapes moved in the storm, hunched and heavy, with limbs too long and eyes that burned like coals. Creatures that had once been living things, mutated by this frozen world, transformed into predators that hunted by temperature. They were drawn not to blood or scent, but to the slightest rise in heat. Karela gripped his arm, her fingers ice cold. They can smell your breath, even the warmth of your heartbeat calls them. She whispered, her voice trembling. If we stay here, we die. If we run, they chase. Rian scanned the area, thinking fast. The only shelter was a shattered tunnel beneath the ruins, half collapsed, but maybe deep enough to hide there. Body heat, without a word he helped Karela to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. She bit her lip but said nothing, leaning on him as they moved slowly through the snow. The wind howled around them, masking their steps but not their presence. Behind them the fire flickered once, then was crushed beneath something heavy. The sound of cracking metal filled the air, followed by a low, hungry growl. They slipped into the tunnel just as one of the creatures appeared on the ridge, its body twisted and covered in thick, ice-coated fur, its face stretched, eyes glowing. Red, its snout lifted as it sniffed the air. Then it howled, a sound that rattled the bones, and others answered from the distance. Rian pulled Karela deeper into the shadows. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls thick with ice and the floor slick. He guided her with one arm, rifle in the other. Every step careful, controlled, silent. Deeper inside, the air grew colder, but the creature's sounds faded. Karela finally collapsed near a half-frozen support beam. Her breathing shallow, her body nearly blue. Rian dropped beside her, wrapping the blanket tighter. Pressing his body against hers, she whispered, "Don't let me freeze, please." He felt her shivering grow worse, and without thinking, he pulled off his jacket, wrapping it around both of them, skin against skin, heat shared in silence. She gasped softly, "You'll freeze too." He shook his head. "Not if we hold on together." Time passed slowly. The cold gnawed at the edges of his senses, but Karela's body began to warm slightly. Her shivering eased, her head resting against his shoulder, her voice barely audible. "I never imagined dying like this. In a place like this beside someone like you." He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. "You're not going to die," he muttered. "Not while I'm still breathing." Outside, the howls grew distant, and the silence returned, heavy and thick like the snow. Karela stirred and whispered, "There's something you should know." Rian opened his eyes, her face close to his, her eyes glowing faintly once more. "My kind when we share heat like this. It isn't just survival." She paused, searching his eyes. "It's a bond, a sacred one, more than just physical warmth. It connects us for life." Rian didn't speak, his mind spinning, the meaning behind her words sinking in. "You could have warned me earlier," he murmured, trying to keep his voice steady. She smiled weakly. "Would you have still saved me?" He didn't answer, not with words, but by pulling her closer, letting the silence between them carry the weight of his choice. The cold still surrounded them, but it no longer felt like it could win. Not here, not now, not with their shared warmth defying it. Karela's breath slowed, her body finally still, and she whispered one final promise before sleep took her. "I will never leave your side. Not now, not ever." And as the storm raged on above them, and the ruins were buried deeper under snow, two enemies turned survivors remained hidden in the dark, bound not by war, but by heat, by trust, and by something older than both their worlds combined. The silence in the tunnel was no longer comforting. It pressed in on them like a weight, heavy and watching. Rian sat still with Karela beside him, her breathing soft, her head resting against his shoulder, the heat between their bodies keeping the cold at bay, but his mind was wide awake, every muscle alert, every sound amplified. His fingers stayed wrapped around the grip of his rifle, just in case the creatures returned or something worse crawled out from the deep ice. Kayrayla stirred slightly, her voice barely more than a whisper, her breath warming his collar. "How long do you think we have before they come back?" He looked around the dark passage, the frost on the walls glinting in the dim emergency glow from his broken visor. "Not long," he replied softly, "but the deeper we go, the harder will be to find." She shifted, her limbs stiff, her body still recovering from the cold, and as she tried to sit up fully, she winced, grabbing at her side where the wound had opened again. Blood slowly seeping through her bandages. Without a word, Rian reached into his pack, pulling out a medical gel tube, his hands moving with practiced speed. But her hand caught his wrist before he could apply it, her eyes locking with his. "This compound," she murmured. "It doesn't react well with my kind. It burns through our inner layer. Makes the pain worse." Rian blinked, confused, but then tucked the gel away, replacing it with clean gauze and a heating strip instead. "You should have told me earlier," he said with a low breath. "I didn't want to sound weak," she answered. "Not to a human soldier." The tension between them shifted again. Not like before when she begged for her life, but something quieter, something heavier. Rian finished wrapping her wound, his hands careful not to cause more pain, and when he pulled back, Kayrayla reached out slowly, her hand resting on his forearm, her touch light, almost unsure. "You could have left me up there," she whispered. "Let the cold take me. Let the beasts feast." He looked at her hand on his armor, then into her eyes. "I didn't," he said simply, and in that one answer, there was more weight than any speech he could have given. They sat like that for a few minutes, unmoving, the cold creeping around their shared warmth. Kayrayla closed her eyes briefly, her voice softer than the wind above them. "In my world, warmth is sacred. We don't share it unless we mean it. Not just survival, not just instinct. It's a connection, a vow." Rian felt her words settle in his chest, heavier than his gear, warmer than the heating strip between them. "What does it mean then?" he asked, not accusing, not doubting, just needing to know. Kayrayla opened her eyes, glowing faintly again with that deep ocean light. "It means I've given you a piece of me I can't take back, and if you walk away now, it'll stay broken." Rian didn't move, didn't blink, the weight of her meaning anchoring him to the spot, and still, something inside him fought to understand. This wasn't war anymore. This wasn't enemy and ally. It was something raw and fragile, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. But he also knew he couldn't ignore it. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the tunnel, not the beasts, but something sharper, mechanical and cold. A short burst of static followed by a low-pitched signal. Rian's heart jumped. He pulled out his damaged compad and tapped the cracked screen. The signal repeated, then words broke through the static. "Command to Rian, if you're receiving extraction in 20 minutes, ping coordinates over." His fingers trembled slightly as he responded, sending the ping. But not his full status, not yet. Kayrayla sat up straighter, watching him, her eyes unreadable. "You're going back," she said quietly, not as a question, but as a truth she had already accepted. Rian nodded slowly. "I have to," he said. "They'll come looking if I don't." Kayrayla's jaw tightened, but her expression didn't change. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice low. "You know what they'll do if they find me with you. I'm not just an enemy soldier. I'm a biological risk, a war trophy, maybe worse." Rian clenched his fists, the truth burning behind his ribs. She was right. His people wouldn't show her the mercy he had. Not after the blood that had been spilled. He stood up, slowly, his shadow stretching across the icy floor. "Then we'll have to make sure they don't find you like this," he said, determination growing in his voice. "You can come with me. We'll hide your identity until I can speak to command. Tell them what you did, how you saved me, how you fought off the cold and the beasts to keep both of us alive." Karela looked at him, studying his face, searching for cracks, for hesitation, but found none. "You'd lie for me?" she asked. "You'd risk court-martial prison for someone you were supposed to kill?" Rian didn't flinch. "I'd risk more than that," he said, "because you didn't have to beg for your life. You didn't have to stay when you could have run. And you didn't have to share your warmth when I was the one who nearly ended you." Karela's breath caught, and for the first time since they met, she looked away, not in shame, but overwhelmed by something she couldn't name. Outside the tunnel, the wind began to change. The storm lessened, light filtering down through the cracks above. The time was near. Rian reached down and offered his hand to Karela. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, her grip firm despite her injuries. As he pulled her to her feet, he said quietly, "We move together, no matter what happens next." And she nodded once, her voice strong again. "Then I'll stand by you, even if your world burns mine." As they moved toward the tunnel mouth, side by side, every step filled with uncertainty, one thing remained clear between them. In a galaxy torn by war and fear, they had found something rare. Not just survival, not just trust, but a warmth that neither side had ever understood. And neither of them would let it go easily. The light that broke through the cracks above was dim and cold, but to Rian it felt like a countdown, the kind that ticked louder with every heartbeat. He and Karela stood just beneath the tunnel's broken ceiling, her cloak now wrapped around her armor, his jacket still covering her shoulders. They had to move, but they had to move carefully. If extraction teams saw her before he could speak to command, they would shoot first and question never. Karela knew this too, yet she followed him without question, her steps quiet, her eyes scanning the upper ledge as if expecting betrayal to fall from the sky itself. Every echo of snow shifting above them sounded like boots. Every gust of wind against metal sounded like gunfire. Rian's grip on his rifle tightened, not for battle, but for the pressure rising in his chest, the weight of what he was about to do. He had faced alien artillery, ambushes, beasts from broken moons. But nothing felt heavier than walking back into the arms of his own people with a living enemy at his side. He glanced at her, saw how her breath formed small clouds, and how her eyes never stopped moving, not out of fear, but because her warrior instincts never rested. "We'll need a story," he said in a low voice. "One they'll believe." Karela nodded once. "Say you captured me, that I surrendered, that I saved your life in exchange for mine." He gave a short breath of agreement. "I'll say you carried me after I was wounded." She smirked faintly. "Which is true, though not in the way they'll assume." They climbed toward a broken stairwell that led to the outer corridor, the place where the signal beacon had been triggered. Rian had timed it carefully, just 20 minutes before the shuttle would appear in the clearing above, the same time now draining away second by second like blood from an open vein. They reached the edge of the corridor, and the snow outside was still thick, but not enough to hide movement from aerial scans. Rian reached into his pouch, pulling out a small beacon flare, but he didn't activate it yet, not until they were in position, not until she was safe. They moved through the snow in silence, their boots leaving only shallow prints. Karela's breathing was uneven, but she never asked to stop, never showed pain, and still she walked beside him with the same pride he had seen when she faced death without blinking. The trees ahead shifted slightly, and Rian paused. Holding up a hand, Karela froze instantly. Both of them crouched low behind a shattered boulder. In the distance came the low hum of engines, the sound of rotating blades, the familiar whine of a human scout dropper slicing through the storm. It circled wide above them once, then again. Scanning the forest edge for heat signatures, Karela's skin began to shimmer faintly again, the glow rising as her internal body heat adjusted. Rian noticed it and whispered urgently, "Turn it down, they'll spot us." She closed her eyes and focused, her glow dimming until it nearly vanished. Rian clicked the flare and tossed it into the open snow. It sparked once, twice, then pulsed red in the clearing. Moments later, the dropper slowed and began to descend, the wind from its blades scattering. Snow like a hurricane, Rian stood up slowly, keeping his weapon low, signaling with both arms. Karela followed his lead but stayed slightly behind him, her face hidden beneath the hood of her cloak. The dropper's doors opened mid-air, and a squad of armored soldiers poured out, weapons raised, helmets scanning, their voices shouting through comms. "Commander Rian, status." Rian stepped forward, voice loud and firm. "Commander Rian, alive, wounded, bringing in a high value asset. She surrendered after saving my life." The lead officer raised a brow, scanning the alien figure behind him. "You brought in a live one," he muttered through his helmet. "That wasn't in the report." Rian didn't flinch. "I didn't have time to update the log. We were hunted in the lower ruins. She helped me survive. I request immediate medevac for both of us." The officer hesitated, his visor pausing on Karela. Then back to Rian. "HQ won't like this." "I'll answer to HQ," Rian said coldly, "but you'll answer to me if she dies before they get to question her." His tone held command, sharp and unforgiving, the kind that made soldiers obey first and think later. The officer finally nodded, signaling the others to lower their rifles. "Get them aboard," he barked. "Double thermal seals. Keep the alien in restraints. Minimal sedation. No harm unless ordered." Karela stepped forward slowly, letting them clamp soft restraints on her wrists, her eyes finding Rian's one last time before she was led toward the shuttle. She didn't speak, but he saw something in her eyes, something between fear and faith. Inside the shuttle, the warmth hit like a wall. After the cold, it felt like drowning in heat. Karela was seated in the back under watch, 2 soldiers near her. Rian sat across from her, refusing medical aid until they were airborne. He stared at her across the small chamber, watching as her eyes flicked between the guards, then to him, then back down to the floor. The engines roared, and the dropper lifted off, rising above the storm, the window beside them showing the frozen world shrinking below. The squad medic approached Rian and applied a temporary patch to his shoulder, muttering about frostbite and poor command decisions. Rian ignored him, his focus still on Karela. The moment they reached orbit, everything would change. The command ship would ask questions, dissect reports, isolate her, maybe worse. And he had no idea how far he would go to protect her, or if he even could. Karela looked up again, and this time she mouthed something silently, not in her tongue, but in his, something she had learned during those nights under frost and fear. "Don't leave me," Rian stared back at her, nodding once, slow and sure, and though he said nothing out loud, his eyes replied with equal weight, "Never." And as the dropper punched through the clouds and into the dark above, carrying them toward a future neither understood, the only warmth that mattered was the one they had shared in the cold. the one that even the coldest human ship couldn't erase. The command ship loomed above like a silent predator in space, its massive body hidden behind layers of steel and shadow. The dropper shuttled closer, guided by automatic locks and sensors, and inside its narrow belly, the air grew colder despite the cabin heat. Karela sat motionless in her corner, the restraints still on her wrists, but her eyes locked on Rian with the focus of a soldier bracing for impact. Rian hadn't taken his gaze off her either. Every time a soldier moved near her, he subtly shifted, placing himself between them, even if only by inches. The pilot's voice came through the calm and detached. "Commander, docking complete. Security detail en route. Stand by for medical and intel processing." Rian gave a short nod, but his grip on his weapon didn't ease. Karela tilted her head, her voice low so only he could hear. "Will they take me apart? Or just vanish me into a room no one remembers?" He looked at her, jaw tight. "Not while I'm standing," she gave a tired smile. Not mocking, not hopeful, just real. The doors hissed open, and the interior lights flickered as the dropper connected to the central hangar. The boarding ramp lowered, and boots hit the deck. 4 security officers in black armor entered, eyes scanning, weapons not drawn but ready. One of them stepped forward and saluted. "Commander Rian, the alien is to be transferred immediately to Holding Bay 7. Level red, orders from High Command." Rian's voice was calm but sharp. "She's my responsibility until debrief. I'll escort her personally." The officer glanced at the others but didn't argue. Rian was high-ranking and visibly wounded, and the alien seemed docile enough for now. Karela stood without needing instruction, her movements slow but controlled. She walked beside Rian as he led the way, ignoring the curious stares from the corridors. The humans who passed them stopped mid-step, seeing a living alien walking freely, restrained but upright, eyes forward. Her silver skin dulled under the artificial lights, but her presence commanding, like a storm hidden behind still water. They entered a private corridor, the kind only officers and trusted personnel used, and the security team fell back, leaving just Rian and Karela in front. A small gesture of trust or fear. Rian didn't care which. As they reached the holding chamber, the door scanned Rian's ID and opened with a low groan. The room inside was sterile, 1 bench, 1 wall screen, and a field barrier where a door should be. Rian motioned for her to sit, and she obeyed, folding her legs like she had done by the fire on that frozen battlefield. He stepped to the panel and entered override codes, delaying the next scan rotation by a few minutes. Enough time to talk before the room recorded everything. Karela watched him carefully, her voice steady. "They'll tear this from you, you know that." He turned to her. "I've survived worse." She tilted her head. "But have you ever had to survive your own people?" He didn't answer right away, but the silence between them did. The same silence they had shared in the ice. The same bond that had grown not from words, but from trust, born in fire and fear. "They'll try to use you," Rian said, stepping closer. "Use your body, your mind, your loyalty." Karela didn't blink. "And what will you do when they demand I be dissected for science or security?" His jaw tightened, his voice low. "Then I'll stop them." She leaned forward, her eyes glowing softly now, not from heat but from something deeper. "Even if it means turning against your own." He nodded once, slow and certain. "If I have to." The door opened again, this time without warning, and 2 officers entered wearing intel uniforms. Behind them stood a woman with sharp features and eyes like frost. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Commander Rian, step away from the subject." Rian didn't move. She's not a subject, she's a survivor. The woman narrowed her eyes. That's not your call anymore. Karela stood as well, her head high. So it begins, she murmured. They took her. Hands still bound, but not gently. And Rian watched as she walked away without struggling, without looking back. Not because she had given up, but because she trusted him to follow, to fight, to not abandon what they had forged. Rian turned to the officer, demanding access to the intel reports, to her vitals, to everything. But they refused, citing classification, citing risk, citing fear. And in every word they spoke, he saw their walls rising higher and his resolve hardening sharper. That night, Rian couldn't sleep. The medical bay buzzed with quiet machines, but his mind was louder, replaying her voice, her warmth, her warning. He pulled up a secure terminal and hacked into the off-book's logs, scanning until he found her holding location. The file didn't call her by name, just Asset 7X. And something in his chest snapped quietly. He closed the console, pulled on his jacket, and left the room without clearance. The lower labs were cold and unlit. Only flickering lights guided his way. He passed empty rooms and guarded doors. But no one stopped him. Maybe they didn't see him. Maybe they were too afraid. Maybe something in his eyes told them not to interfere. When he reached the final door, he used his clearance, then forced the last lock manually, and when it opened, the cold air spilled over him like a memory. Karela was there, inside a translucent field, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her cloak gone, her skin dull from the cold. But her eyes locked onto him the moment the door opened, and despite the distance, despite the isolation, she smiled, not with her lips, but with her eyes, and he stepped forward, reaching toward the barrier that hummed between them, his fingers only inches from hers, separated by light and fear, but connected still by something stronger. And she whispered, so softly the system almost didn't catch it, I knew you'd come. Rian leaned closer, his voice like steel wrapped in fire. I'm not leaving you here, not now, not ever. And in the silence that followed, neither war nor command nor protocol mattered anymore. Only the warmth they had shared in the cold, and the promise they refused to let break. The cold inside the lab wasn't just from the lack of heat. It was the kind of cold that lived in the walls, in the silence, in the sterile lights that buzzed overhead without warmth or mercy. Rian stood with his hand pressed against the barrier. Between them, his fingers trembling from something deeper than the ship's chill. Karela looked back at him without fear, without panic. Only that same quiet strength he had seen on the battlefield, in the tunnel. In the moment she first whispered for him not to end her. She didn't ask him to break her out, didn't plead for freedom. She only stood slowly, one foot in front of the other, until she faced him through the shimmering light wall, her voice low and steady like a heartbeat in the dark. They're going to study me soon, try to understand what I am, how I lived, what I felt when I shared heat with you. Rian's jaw clenched, and his voice came out like a growl behind gritted teeth. You're not an experiment. You're not some broken weapon they can take apart. She stepped closer, her hands rising. Slowly, palms open and calm. I know what's coming. I knew it the moment I walked onto your ship. But I also knew you'd follow. I believed in that. Her words wrapped around him like the fire they once huddled beside, and he could feel the weight of her trust settled deep in his bones. Heavier than any weapon, stronger than any oath. He pressed his badge against the lock panel, but the system rejected his clearance. Red lights flashing. Access denied, blinking like a warning shot. Karela tilted her head. You'll get yourself marked as a traitor, she whispered. Is my life worth the target that'll burn into your name? He stared at her, breathing hard, fists clenched, and replied with the same certainty he had spoken in the ice. You gave me warmth when I needed it most. Now it's my turn. The lab door behind him opened suddenly, and voices spilled in like a wave of cold wind. 2 senior officers stepped through, flanked by armed guards, their expressions unreadable, and their weapons already halfway raised. Commander Rian, one of them barked. You are in direct violation of Secure Zone Protocol. Step away from the alien. Rian didn't move, didn't speak, only narrowed his eyes as if daring them to try. The other officer stepped forward, voice tighter. She's not your concern anymore. She's a classified threat asset. She's going to be transferred to the upper decks for neural mapping. Karela's face didn't change, but her fingers twitched at her sides, and Rian stepped closer to the barrier until their breath mirrored again on the glowing wall between them. She saved my life, Rian said coldly. She helped me survive. She fought off the heat feeders. She kept me breathing when even my own squad would have left me behind. The officer didn't flinch, and that's exactly why she's dangerous. She's unpredictable, emotionally compromised, possibly carrying advanced forms of biolink manipulation. Karela whispered. They think I rewired your mind. And Rian let out a low, bitter laugh. No, you just reminded me I still had one. The guards raised their rifles slightly, not to fire, but as a warning. The second officer said calmly, We can't let personal emotions interfere with protocol. You've been through trauma, Rian. You're not thinking clearly, Rian. Turned toward them now, his face sharp as a blade. I'm thinking clearer than I ever have. Clearer than those nights when you sent us into death zones without backup. Clearer than when you ordered us to eliminate anything that bled a different color without asking why. His voice cracked like lightning through the lab. I found something in the cold you forgot existed, Mercy. The room went silent, the tension so thick it felt like the ship itself had stopped moving. Karela stood tall, her hands still open, her head high, and the energy field hummed between them like a live wire ready to snap. Finally, one of the officers sighed and stepped back. Then convince us, Rian. Prove she's not a threat. Prove she deserves to live. The words were sharp, but not impossible. And the crack in their resolve was all Rian needed. He turned to Karela, his voice steady and loud. Tell them what you told me. Tell them who you are. She stepped even closer to the barrier, her glow soft but clear now. My name is Karela of the Valkyrie Prime Front. I was raised for war, trained for survival, and taught that humans were nothing more than brutal firewalkers who left only ashes behind. Her voice didn't shake, but then I met one who didn't burn me, who didn't end me when he had every reason to. Instead, he shared warmth. Not just of skin, but of soul. Her eyes scanned each officer slowly. If I were a weapon, I had every chance to strike. If I were a trap, I had every moment to spring it. Instead, I chose to kneel, to offer not a blade, but a bond. The guards hesitated, their grips loosening slightly. Rian turned back to the officers. She could have killed me 10 times over, but she didn't. She stayed even when I bled, even when I froze, even when I doubted her. He pointed at the glowing field. She is not a prisoner. She is a bridge. The silence was long, heavy, and uncertain. The officers stared at the floor, at the walls, at the lights above, anything but her eyes. Then the higher-ranking one stepped forward and tapped his wrist console. After a second, the barrier between them flickered and vanished, and Karela's breath caught in her throat. Rian reached out without hesitation and pulled her into his arms, her body cold but alive. the weight of 1,000 doubts falling away as they stood together in the open space. The officer finally spoke again, his voice low. "You've got until the next cycle rotation to convince command. After that, I can't stop what comes next." Rian nodded once. Kayrilla pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Then we better make them listen," she said with a calm fire burning behind every word, and Rian tightened his grip on her hand. "They'll listen, or they'll burn down their own future." And as the door closed behind them, and the ship returned to its silent hum, two figures walked side by side. No longer soldier and alien, no longer captive and rescuer, but something new, something born not from orders, not from survival, but from the warmth they had chosen to protect at any cost. The council chamber was colder than any battlefield, not because of temperature, but because of the eyes watching from every corner, eyes that had never seen war up close, never smelled blood and frozen dirt, never held a dying soldier whispering. For warmth, Rian stood in the center of the glass floor. Kayrilla beside him, her cloak returned, her wrists unbound but marked by faint red lines where the cuffs had rested for too long. The human officials lined the curved bench above, armored. In their rank, untouched by frost or flame, a silence hung like mist over everything, waiting for one crack to break the stillness. "You brought an enemy into our stronghold," the lead official said, voice echoing across the chamber. "You disobeyed direct security protocol, bypassed quarantine orders, and then used your rank to shield her from containment." Rian didn't flinch, didn't look away, his voice calm but edged with fire. "She saved my life, not once, but multiple times. She had every reason to leave me to die or kill me herself. Instead, she stayed, fought for me, bled for me, and shared heat, so I wouldn't freeze to death in the ruins you sent me to." The murmurs began behind the benches, whispers of disbelief, of questions not yet dared to speak aloud. The lead official narrowed her eyes. "You're a commander, Rian. You're trained to resist manipulation, and yet here you are, defending a bioengineered combatant with a known record of field kills against human units." Kayrilla stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I will not beg again. I did what I was created to do, until I saw what I was not meant to see." Her gaze swept the room, unwavering. A human who chose mercy over victory, who saw a weapon and offered it. A chance to be more. One of the younger council members leaned forward. Uncertain, curious. "You claim you're no longer a threat, but why should we believe this change is real?" Kayrilla didn't blink. "Because if it wasn't, I would have turned this ship into a tomb the moment you brought me aboard. I know your systems, your weaknesses. I was trained for infiltration. But I didn't, and I won't, because I found something worth protecting, not destroying." Rian placed his hand gently over hers, his touch light but steady. "She's not a risk, she's a bridge." The silence stretched again, heavier now, like something invisible pressing down on the floor beneath them. Finally, the lead counselor spoke with careful words. "And what exactly do you expect from us, Commander Rian? Sanctuary for an alien? Soldier, amnesty for an enemy of the state? Public acknowledgement of your connection?" Rian lifted his head higher. "I expect you to remember what it means to be human, to recognize a life that chose peace when war was easier, and to understand that the future doesn't come from repeating the past." Kayrilla added softly, "I do not seek amnesty, only the right to walk beside the one who showed me another path." The chamber fell still again, and one by one the counselors activated their private consoles. Their decisions would be made in seconds, but the results would echo for generations. Rian's fingers tightened slightly around Karela's, and she held his gaze with a calm fire that hadn't faded since that first night in the snow. The counselor's screen blinked once, twice, then the lead figure stood and faced them again. By vote of the War Council, the subject Karela of the Valkyrie Prime is hereby granted provisional protected status under Article 12 of the Cross-Species Accord, pending further review and oversight. Karela's breath caught, her hand twitching slightly, and Rian's shoulders dropped just enough to reveal the tension that had threatened to crush him from within. But the counselor wasn't finished, her voice sharp again. However, you, Commander Rian, are to be removed from field duty pending psychological evaluation and reassigned to diplomatic intelligence operations under observation, effective immediately. Rian accepted the judgment without resistance, his mind already far from the walls of the chamber, already imagining the days ahead with Karela walking freely. No longer hunted, no longer hiding. They left the chamber side by side, guards escorting but no longer aiming weapons. Corridors that once echoed with suspicion now simply passed behind them. They entered a smaller wing of the ship, one not yet defined by war or politics, a quiet place where Rian had been assigned quarters during the reassignment. Karela stepped inside first, her fingers brushing the frame of the door, as if testing whether it would vanish like a dream. Rian followed, her removing his gear slowly, setting down his rifle, his his old life piece by piece. Karela stood by the window, looking out at the stars beyond the steel. So this is what freedom feels like, she whispered. It's quieter than I imagined. He stepped beside her, his voice lower now, no longer guarded. It's quieter because it's real. She turned to him, her silver skin reflecting starlight, her eyes soft but sure. Do you believe it will last? Rian hesitated, then nodded. Not without struggle, not without more fights, but yes, I believe. Karela stepped closer, her hand rising to his chest, her touch no longer hesitant. Then I will stand beside you, not just in war, but in peace. And he took her hand, lifted it to his lips, and pressed a kiss to the skin where once she had worn chains. That night, they sat side by side on the narrow bed, not saying much, only sharing the quiet, the warmth, the understanding that what they had built would be tested again and again. But it had already survived fire, ice, betrayal, fear, and silence, and now it stood against time itself. Outside, the stars kept burning, and somewhere deep in the ship, a new log was created, not of war, not of defeat, but of something forgotten by many, something feared by most. Something stronger than command or rank or blood. The log simply read, first contact, emotional integration, success. But to Rian and Karela, it meant something more than any file could explain. It meant they had chosen each other, and in a galaxy that taught them only to hate, they had proven warmth was a weapon too, one worth holding on to, forever.